Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our first virtual Marine Science Day. We are excited to have attendees from all over the world with us today. My name is Christy Pondell, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at VIMS. I will be your host for the session. In this session, we are excited to have Karen During, a marine scientist at VIMS, with us to discuss living shorelines.
Hello, everyone.
We have a lot of questions coming in, so we're just going to get started.
Okay.
The first question, are there community involvement projects that one can join to help plant wetland vegetation?
Yes, definitely. In most areas, some of these living shoreline projects are great opportunities for volunteer organizations and volunteer opportunities. There are several groups here in Virginia and in other coastal states around the United States where volunteer labor is really important to help reduce the costs and give the community a chance to be involved and adopt the project and watch it over time and get more involved with the whole practice and then help spread the word about it.
That's great. How do you know which restoration practices are right for your property or for your region?
That's a great question because every shoreline is a little bit different and there are many different factors that you might have to take into consideration. And there are several tools available no matter where you're located. There's been a lot of effort at VIMS and other institutions to provide tools where you can look at your particular property, you can work through some decision support tools and look at maps and get ideas. The other way to do it is to seek the advice of experts that are in your area that are familiar with what's been working or not working as well in your particular location.
Are there certain types of tree species or dune plants that are more beneficial than others?
Yes, we always recommend the use of plants that are native to that type of habitat from your local area. And in some places, there are some native trees and plants that aren't as well suited to providing erosion stabilization. Here in Virginia, we like to use deep-rooted grasses because they grow fast. They have interconnected roots and rhizomes that contribute to shoreline stabilization. And for native trees on the shoreline, there are some that hold up better to wind and they don't get blown over as easily. So there may be some choices that you would like to make for your location, but always look to the native habitats, what's already growing in your area for cues about what plants might work the best. And again, there's a lot of resources available for trying to figure out what your plant palette or list of plant species might be.
Excellent. So when you have riprap and it doesn't make sense to get rid of it, is there anything that you can do to encourage more of a living shoreline, or are you just stuck with riprap?
That's a great question. So the engineers who help people take care of their revetments do suggest not allowing vegetation to grow into the structures to get too big to be covered with trees and shrubs, but you can possibly plant above the structure, create a riparian buffer habitat, even if it's just a simple planted bed, a garden bed instead of mowed grass right down to the top of the stone. And even better than that would be to plant native shrubs and even trees if you can include those in the landscape design. And for some revetments, if there's enough room on the water side, you might be able to plant marsh vegetation or beach vegetation, depending on how much room you have and how often waves strike the toe of the stone that's in place. We call these shoreline enhancements. It can also be done with bulkheads. There are definitely practices and more interest in trying to green up shoreline armoring when you can't remove those structures entirely.
So it looks like we have somebody joining us from South Carolina, and they say that this would be really helpful in South Carolina. So do you happen to know of anyone in North Carolina or South Carolina using these methods?
Yes, both states have active living shoreline programs now. And one source of potential information is the Living Shoreline Academy. If you go online and search for that, it's a national website and it has a directory where you can search by state. And that will help pull up professionals and experts and environmental organizations that have registered with the Living Shoreline Academy for your locations. And I do know that there's a lot of successful work going on in North Carolina with the North Carolina Coastal Federation and also in South Carolina. They've been working with living shorelines and including the use of oysters in the living shoreline designs. So I think you won't have any trouble finding some information for South Carolina.
Excellent. That was really helpful. I know there's a couple of questions looking for who do they contact about living shorelines, so that's helpful. So you talked about the oysters just a little bit. Are the oysters in the bags, are they alive when you put them in there, or what's going on with that?
No, usually it's shell, it's clean shell. And sometimes they're using shells that have been recycled from restaurants. So that's a program that some of the coastal states have to support oyster restoration, is a network of restaurants and volunteers who collect the shells off of our plates when we're done eating them. And they put the shells into buckets or trash cans by the back door. Volunteers come and pick them up. They put them out in the sun and let them bake for a little while to clean them off. And then they are repackaged into the bags to be put back out into the water so that they can provide valuable reef habitat for oysters again. And so for living shoreline designs, typically what's in the containment systems is just loose shell, but it doesn't take long at all for us to see oyster spat, young oysters starting to appear, as well as lots of other shellfish organisms, ribbed mussels and barnacles here in Virginia, and then all of the other animals that are attracted to crawling and living and swimming in the spaces of these reefs. So it's usually just shell.
Awesome. So there's a few people who are interested in kind of a case study. So they have an inherited property that 30 years ago had 20 to 25 feet of marsh grass in front of a bulkhead. Over time, the wake from increased boat traffic has eroded that marsh away. So what would be the preferred method to restore this marsh?
Well, the first thing to do is to sort of know what's happening at that particular location with the directions that the waves are coming from. What's the tide range? How deep is the water at high tide, and how far out does it go at low tide, and what kind of marsh is it? And it may be possible to expand the marsh width. It may be possible to add sand fill and expand the width of the marsh, sort of restore a little bit of what has been lost, or to simply put what we call a toe structure along the edge of what's left of the marsh. If it's a fairly decent, if it's still 20 to 25 feet wide, that's a pretty nice wide marsh. And then just put one of these structures, either a sill or one of the reef structures, if you're in a place with shellfish productivity, along the edge of the marsh to sort of help knock down the wave action that's contributing to the continued erosion of the marsh. But with a bulkhead there, it's always important to look at what's happening if waves are striking the bulkhead. Are they reflecting off that bulkhead and creating extra energy? Because you don't want to create a backstop for that reflected wave energy by putting up a sill. So there's some of the factors that you would have to consider at that particular location. Again, I encourage you to look for experts at your local area to help you evaluate your site, or go online and use some of the design tools like the design guidelines that we have at VIMS. We can help you find that. And we can help you find maps for your location as well. If you want to send us an email, we'll help you get the right information.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, I just lost all of my questions. So another question here is, what are some types of water bodies that this practice is best used for?
So currently, living shorelines are being most widely applied in tidal systems, tidal water bodies, marine estuaries. So this would be sheltered coasts. By that, I mean not the open ocean coast. So not along the ocean beaches where the wave action is just too great for most of these living habitats. And the main habitat for ocean coasts are wide sandy beaches. And beach nourishment is a practice along much of our East Coast. Many of our coastal communities rely on a periodic placement of sand to maintain our sandy beaches on the barrier islands and the ocean coast. But in the estuaries, inside the Chesapeake Bay, inside the Albemarle, Pamlico Sound of North Carolina, and other sheltered coasts, this is where these practices are being used most widely. But it's also possible to practice the same approach, and I'm seeing more applications around lakes and ponds, large stormwater lakes or natural lakes that people live around. There are similar applications and products that are being developed for these freshwater systems that don't have the same kind of wave action or tidal rise and fall of tides that these practices are currently being applied for. So there are other applications. Now, stream restoration is a totally different practice. For streams that are running through urban areas, there is also a lot of work and a lot of new restoration projects to restore the natural meandering of streams, vegetation to streams, trying to reduce erosion that's been caused by lots of stormwater running down stream channels. But stream restoration is a totally different practice.
Are there resources for teachers to help explain living shorelines to students?
There are, depending on the grade level. So much of the design guidance and information about living shorelines that you can find is for a general audience, and some students may be able to understand much of it. There are a few places where there's specific criteria, education curriculum that are being developed for students. I deal mostly with adult learning and training, so I'm not engaged with the K through 12 programs, but I'm sure that there are some more and more resources available out there. And if anybody's willing to share, if you know of living shoreline education curriculum for young students, I would appreciate knowing about that so we can share it with others. But there's definitely information about erosion. There's a lot of information about tidal habitats and their importance, and why we need to try to protect these habitats from the development pressures they're experiencing, as well as natural pressures like sea level rise and other climate change factors.
Excellent, thank you. It looks like that's all of our time for today. Ms. During, thank you so much for being here to help us learn more about living shorelines. You can also browse the extensive collection of resources on the home screen. And finally, we want to thank First Advantage Federal Credit Union for supporting this session today. Have a great day, everyone.